Greetings, everybody, to another episode of the Introspection Hour with Brian and Patrick, where we talk about thoughts, feelings, and emotions associated with everything that life has to offer. So, my name is Brian.
And I'm Patrick.
And Patrick, I'm just gonna get straight to it. Over the last couple of days, man, I swear to God, I've been feeling a little bipolar. And you ever since we've known each other, since middle school and high school, I've always been the emotional type, and you've always seemed like the type of person who's always had his stuff figured out. Like, particularly with COVID-19, for example, okay? I've been feeling a lot more, let's just face it, I've been feeling very depressed lately. And knowing me, I've always been an emotional type of guy. It's so hard to get all of my positive emotions out. How do you do it? You've always been a positive guy for me. How do you stay positive all the time?
I don't know if it's that I've always been positive. I think for the most part, I keep it contained more than you, right? And so there's like a false illusion. Like there's a lot of times where I'm depressed or I'm feeling down. I'm not feeling, but I just kind of keep like more of a stoic face, just kind of just make it so that people don't see too much into it. But I mean, you and our other friends, you guys can see kind of through me, and that's one thing. But I feel like thoughts of when we have those type of thoughts, it's pretty normal. It's just you don't see it in everyone. So like what kind of thoughts have you been kind of going through, or what is it? Any triggers or?
I mean, let's break it down first as far as the emotions that I feel. So I'm 36 years old. I am single and I have no immediate family near me. And I guess one thing is, as I've gotten older, a part of my life that's associated with like that depressive feeling is kind of associated with just is this life? Like, is this it? And you're talking about triggers all of a sudden. No, not all of a sudden, but you're talking about triggers where the trigger is the virus. Like we're all, I'm going to say the word forced to stay shelter in place, being able to make sure that we don't get sick, our families don't get sick. And as a result, I can't go out. Like I've stopped doing the things that I enjoyed doing, like playing basketball, for example, hanging out with friends, and just doing things that I used to find joy before the virus. And because, can you believe it's already been 6 or 7 months that we've, right? And so that all of these things are just factoring in where it's like, I feel like this is life. Like this is life. We come home, we go to work. I mean, for those of us who are lucky to have work, this is all we do.
There's this realization where people have to figure out who they really are, because to a certain point, this amount of home time is crazy and unusual, especially like from my perspective where you're by yourself. Me, I got my wife and my daughter that just they consume my day-to-day, but it doesn't leave much time for me, or it doesn't leave much time for any sort of extra activities, right? Like I haven't picked up my golf clubs in more than 5-6 months, because I prioritize them over, prioritize my playing with my daughter instead of me going golfing for 5-6 hours. And I would say one thing that COVID is forcing on everyone, you can't hide who you are anymore. So every day, people who used to be really busy, they just kept themselves busy, but really they were lazy. And so they just substituted. So you're kind of masking some of the internal issues that people deal with. And but on the flip side, I remember when I first moved to DC, how lonely it was. No immediate family, just go to work, come back. Didn't have a lot of friends, hung out with coworkers, maybe for a happy hour. But that's like 2 hours on a Friday, right? 2-3 hours happy hour. And then what about the weekend? Maybe the driving range, or maybe around the golf or something if I felt up to it. But more often than not, I was sitting at home watching TV.
But doesn't that get old though? Like that's what
absolutely.
That's what everyone right now is doing, right? You go to work, you come home, you watch TV, you play video games, whatever it is you use to pass the time. But then it's like you rinse and repeat every single day. I know we talked about this with our career change episode, where it's like, you're doing the same mundane routine over and over and over. And at some point, particularly for me, it just hit me where it's like, this is it, man? Like, is this life?
I think people still need to cut themselves a lot of slack. If you believe everything that's coming at you, social media, the media, the self-help books and whatever, right? Like everything says you need to be 100% every waking hour, right? I love these movie stars like Mark Wahlberg or Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. We love these guys, but they post these like a day in the life of a movie star. You get up at like 4 or 5 in the morning, you have your personal trainer, you work out, like every day they're on it, supposedly. And I'm like, for the rest of us, that's nowhere near normal. I think it's normal to have that feeling and that experience that you just described. The whole come home and is this life? And to a certain point, it is when you take out everything else. But hopefully it is for those that are fortunate enough that have work and that have a shelter, that we have our basic needs taken care of. Hopefully it's an awakening enough to figure out what you really like to do. What is really important to you, because those are going to be the things that you constantly go back to, right? It's not going to be your once in a while things that you can live your life without it, but the things that you just always have to do, that you're aching to go back to play basketball and,
definitely
things like that. So I think that's really more important.
And I totally hear what you're saying, right? So for example, it's funny you mentioned the whole 4 o'clock in the morning thing. And that's the problem with a lot of people. So we live in a capitalistic society in our generation, right? We're always taught that we gotta hustle. If you're not hustling, that means you're lazing around and you're not gonna succeed, right? We've all seen those motivational videos. We've all seen those graduation talks where you have to be hustling 24/7. Otherwise, you're not giving it your all. If you're not giving it your all, then what the hell are you doing with your life? That pressure, honestly, it gets to me because I try to live I've talked to you about this before many times, off camera, obviously, where it's like, Pat, is it okay if I take a break, man? I feel like I've been hustling for the last, couple of months. And what do you tell those people where it's like, it's okay to take a break? Because it's hard.
Absolutely, it's hard. I think it absolutely is worthwhile to take a break. Look, people will figure out, especially the more they listen to our podcast, Jesus is a big part of my life, right? Even Jesus took breaks. There were crowds coming and he was like, you know what? I need to get away from these people. I need to go up and pray. I need to go do my thing.
Is that true? This sounds like you're making stuff up.
No. It's in the Bible. These are stories, Catholic school. Look it up.
Okay, I'll have to find out somewhere.
Yeah, but he totally had moments where he's like, no. Look, I already gave you guys plenty of instruction. I talked, over an hour or whatever it was. And he said he needed to go and recharge himself. Even he did. He felt the human physical exhaustion, which is what everyone, probably will experience if they're going 100%, if they're giving it their all. Some might last longer than others, but it's not a giving up. You're not failing. You're not giving up. You're just physically, you have to recharge. Mentally, you have to recharge. And that's why meditation works well. Exercise works well. Those type of things are really working well. So I would say that's totally normal. The other thing that you have to contrast with some of the people that do it 100%, they have people who take care of some of their other necessities for them. They don't tell you that. They have a personal trainer who thinks about what you have to work out. We might have gym programs and all that stuff, but you still have to do it yourself. There's a lot that we have to do ourselves that they don't have to do. So you always have to remember they're showing a perspective, but when you get exhausted, listen to your body, right?
But that's hard though. It's hard.
It is.
Right? Because then again, so going back to what I was saying before, I get what you're saying, going back to your body, but then you feel, what else? How do you suppress that urge where it's like, if I'm not hustling, then I'm failing? how do you get past that? Like, I get what you're saying. Everything you're saying makes complete sense. But there are those people, such as myself, where it's like, if I'm not pushing myself, if I'm not constantly working on my videos, if I'm not constantly reading or doing something, I'm slacking. Let's just face it, I'm slacking.
You know, nowadays, especially like in our conversations and with others, people set goals for themselves. And they set these very aspirational goals. What I think people don't do from a pure project management standpoint is they don't set milestones. You need to give yourself milestones, not so much on like outputs, but what are the outcomes? You know, how much are you improving your speech, or, you know, how many subscribers are you growing, or just even what do you want to be able to do at certain points before you get to your goal. The other thing is that you have to break it down and practice. So instead of constantly challenging yourself, sometimes Olympic athletes, they find improvement through constant practice. You know, you see that in a lot of the sports figures. But so I think in our age, with, let's even say, you know, podcasts, you might have to just keep practicing the thing that you're not very good at. You know, it could just be looking at the camera. So 5 minutes a day or something, you're just going to record a video for yourself and you're going to review it based on your eye movement. Or in my case, as you've told me, I say or you know. So one way to not feel like I'm losing and just, I might not be creating content, but I'm practicing not saying you know. So I would do like a 5-minute recording. I would speak about whatever I want. And then I would review it and count the number of times. And that's it. Okay, so it's 10 minutes out of your day. It takes a lot of effort, but you can feel comfortable that that practice is going to help you in the long run and reach your goal, reach your milestones. But when you set an aspirational goal, I want 100,000 subscribers. That could be 5 years, it could be 10 years, it could be never. So then every day you're going to be disappointed in yourself.
So obviously you got to set realistic goals, right?
You set realistic goals. Realistic aspirational goals, but you set goals. If you're going to set a goal, if you're going to set milestones, what are you really doing to achieve those goals and milestones?
I'm hustling, man. I'm hustling, and that's a part I'm having a problem with. Like, I'm trying to, let's say, hit these 100,000 subscribers, trying to hit the 1 million download podcast, whatever. Again, if I'm not hustling, right, it gets that pressure, right? So, like, I know I'm putting in the practice, I'm putting in the effort, but what happens if you don't hit those milestones? Let's say, you know, you put it, you're trying your hardest, man, right? And at some point, you just, let's face it, you fail. Like, you don't hit it. How do you deal with that?
The default is you give up. We say it a little bit like half jokingly, and we don't mean to, like, I don't mean to downplay it, but at some point, maybe you do need to give it up or give up the goal to make it fun. If this is something that you want to do as a hobby, if this is something that you want to do as a feel-good thing, then don't put a goal on it. You know, just do it. Just create the content. If it comes, it comes, right? So the goal setting is very good for businesses. It's not good for our mental health. It's not good for our emotional stability. And it's not even good because you're stressing yourself out. You get anxious about it. You get self-conscious about it. Then it's just like you're just trying to make money. You lose your natural inquisitiveness and just curiosity that goes with it. So if it's too much pressure, take off the pressure on yourself. Take the pressure off, right? Like a lot of people won't do that though. They'll be like, no, I set a goal, I need to make it. Not everything in your life has to have goals. Like getting married, it should not be this goal that you have. Getting married should happen out of love, you know? Having 5 kids shouldn't be a goal. You should just have as many kids as you and your wife or wife and husband like decide to do, right? Like I love the people that come up to me and they go, I'm gonna have 5 kids. I used to do this too. I used to, hands up, I used to say like, I'm gonna have 5 kids. They'll even out a basketball team and I'll teach them how to cheat, you know, like, because Brian's kids will be more, you know, our other friends, they're more physically, you know, inclined than I am. So I gotta teach my kids something, give them an edge, right? And so all I'm saying that is, your expectations are sometimes misaligned with what really matters. And I think that's the biggest thing, because after having one kid, we're barely going to be okay with two. Yeah, like we're like, okay, we're stopping after that. This is too hard. So
I actually want to add to your comment about expectations, actually. So the one thing that I started learning how to do for myself is starting to set lower expectations. And I know that might sound like a bad thing, but it's like one of the key components of disappointment is the fact that when we set expectations of, let's say, of someone, right? I expect them to wash the dishes. I expect them to do something nice for me. And if they don't do it, we set ourselves up for disappointment. So you actually make a good point about just keeping your expectations low, or in fact, don't have any expectations at all. That way, you're not going to feel that emotional disappointment if your expectations aren't met. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I think this is where people shouldn't do goals on everything in their life, right? Like, and that way you don't have expectations on every part of your life. That's just if we bring it back to what we really want to talk about today, about people's mental health, the depression, the loneliness, or even just the constant berating that you're giving yourself because you're not meeting your goals, right? It factors into our mental health. It factors into what I feel people being too hard on themselves. Live a little, right? Like live a little. And if your expectations of what you're going to do on your podcast as a hobby is not making it, then don't have any expectations. I mean, you should have expectations on things that make sense. Setting goals for physical fitness is fine. But again, what are we going to draw the limit on? At what point, what aspect of our lives are we going to take back control? Is where I see it. Like a lot of, even loneliness, how much of that is actually in our control versus not in our control? And it's a interesting question. So let me pivot a little bit and let me segue this. Brian, you live single. You're a bachelor. You drive a fancy car. You're living in Bellevue, Washington, and so you've got a lot of positive check marks. Let me put it that way. All right, and I know, and you've talked about it before a little bit more openly. The sense of loneliness. Kind of help everyone understand where that comes from for you.
So, me, growing up, I grew up with a single mother. And I don't want to, I hate to say that this is the reason why I am who I am, but a lot of it does factor the fact that when I was growing up, I was not able to get my needs met. And as a result, if you want to call it my neediness, was basically portrayed towards other people. Like, for example, you, my girlfriends, my ex-girlfriends, like my friends, it's like, or in this case, you want to call it a popularity contest, right? Where it's like the more friends I have, the more, look at this, I'm not lonely. I have 16 friends. I have 20 friends who I could contact anytime I want. They'll hang out with me. And going back to this idea of loneliness, where it actually really hit me strong last year after my separation with my ex-girlfriend, is that I wanted to do something about it, right? Because the hardest thing, because loneliness is such a pandemic. Yeah, well, I'll say it this way. It is a pandemic. It affects a lot of people globally. And with the whole smartphone, social media, where everyone's being more disconnected, no matter the fact that we are more connected than ever, a lot of people feel very disconnected amongst each other because the fact that, let's say, I could see what you're doing on Facebook. Oh, I know what Patrick's up to. I could just talk to you on like Google Chat or Twitter or whatever we want to talk. We could chat anytime we want. But a lot of the times I want that physical connection, whether it's your voice, I could see you on the camera. I just need to have some sort of tangential connection towards you. And before pre-COVID, we'll just say pre-COVID, when I was feeling that sensation of just like fudge, I'm just so lonely. I hate being alone. I took the responsibility to do something about it. So you know me, I'm a shy guy, I'm a pretty introverted guy, and I remember this was back in, I believe, April or May. I decided that one Friday I'm just gonna go sign up on a meetup group for a barbecue event that was being hosted at Great Lake Park over in the state of Washington. And I told myself, you know what, I'm just gonna go out there and just talk to people. And I want to say that was the pivotal point where, like, you know what, talking to people is actually not as hard as people make it out to be. Right? I mean, you're not. One of the things with people who are, let's say, people like me who want to constantly be making friends, is that we put too much, again, expectations that if we're gonna go somewhere, you're gonna be my best friend right away. I want to have this deeper connection with you right away. But connections take time to build up, and luckily for me, I've had a chance to really meet at least 2 good friends here, 2 to 3 really good friends that I could say I could call them and we could have a chit chat if I wanted to. But granted, the loneliness thing is still there, and I don't know whether or not even when I had a girlfriend, loneliness was still there. So it's not something that even if you do have someone with you, it doesn't mean that you don't feel loneliness inside. There's one thing I want to reiterate, that there's a difference between being alone and feeling lonely. There's actually 2 separations from that. So,
oh yeah, that is incredibly important for people to separate, right? In terms of being alone versus being lonely. And I felt lonely too, and I felt both at the same time. But more importantly, I felt lonely even when I was surrounded by people.
Exactly, so that's a difference. Right? Yes.
There's being lonely has nothing to do with social media, has nothing to do with the people that are around you. Being lonely is a very internal, personal, individual experience. There is like this thought that just starts to percolate into your mind that you feel like the walls are caving in. You feel like your sphere, your environment is limited, you're boxed in. And that's loneliness. It's not claustrophobia. Claustrophobia is a whole different thing, but loneliness is this like mentally, emotionally, you're not reaching out, you're not going anywhere else. And to your point, you do need just something to break the glass. I remember when I was pretty lonely in a lot of different points in my life.
Shut up.
It could have been when, yeah.
You look like the guy, you've always been the guy who was popular. I swear to God, from high school, college, you always had friends around you, man.
Are you kidding me?
Yes,
I was picked on, and I was hanging around folks, but I wasn't a part of them.
Huh, so that's surprising.
Here's the thing that maybe it wasn't as clear. I was always okay to tag along. So there were always other people who were cooler than me, right? And so for people that don't know, there were a lot of people that we thought were cooler than us that, we didn't get to hang around with. There were few groups that let me tag along. And by association of church or wherever I met them, wherever I had a connection. And God bless them, they're great people. But I could tell we were not jiving, right? Like the things that they liked, I didn't really like. The things that they wanted to do, I didn't really do. But they let me hang out with them. It just allowed me to be around them. But I was lonely because I wasn't around people that I was comfortable with. So I think the biggest thing I learned, whether it was that in high school or as I got older or I moved to DC, finding people that you're comfortable with is truly the best way to get yourself out of being lonely, right? And it doesn't need to be a lot of people. It's just 1, 2 people that you have around you, and you just don't need to feel that sense of loneliness because someone is comfortable. Even married people will feel aspects of loneliness. But that distinction, being alone does not equal feeling lonely. You could go to parties, you could be around people, you could consume your life, but in reality, they're lonely. And what it is that they're just not themselves, their true selves around. They're not letting that true self come out enough because you're putting up your facade too much, right? Or you're just so timid that you're just I would hang out with other groups or other people that you thought I was, having fun with. And to a certain point, yes, but I was always one degree away, right? You're sitting next to the people, but you're 1 degree away. They're laughing about things. You're laughing along, but you're that's not that funny. Or that's not that funny to me. Right. And then, we get together and we laugh about things that other people are dude, my wife says this all the time when we used to get together, and she would be like, none of your jokes are funny, Patrick. I don't know why your friends laugh at your jokes. And I'm like, what are you talking about? They get it. You know?
We're just trying to make you feel good, man. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you have friends like mine and you're wondering why I get lonely, it's because they laugh at my jokes, thinking that that's what I need to, stay on the up and up, and that way I don't, lose myself or something like that. But I would say that. So there's this perception, but that's where it is that sure, I was never alone, but there were a lot of moments I was like, man, I'm pretty lonely, even though there's things going around. So people around me laughing and enjoying it. It also happens when I try to play basketball. I get pretty lonely. No one passes me the ball. I'm always picked last.
It's because you kick the ball. We're not playing soccer, dude. The game's basketball, not kicking the ball. It's actually so. Going back to that loneliness and the whole like feeling like you're alone in a big empty room despite being in the party. One of the biggest factors I realize is that the reason why people feel like that because they're unable to form a deeper connection with other people. Right? Like this happens very often. Let's say people who are in middle school, high school, we'll just say the elementary years. It's that going back again to the facade. We're all trying to essentially be someone we're not in order to impress other people for them to like us, right? And like one of the reasons why, you're my best, I consider like you, John, and a few other people like best friends is because I could totally be 100% authentic with who I am as a person. I can be vulnerable with you. I can cry with you, and I won't feel like I'm ashamed. I won't feel like I'm being judged for the things that I'm doing. And that's what I feel like a lot of people need to do more of, just being their authentic and vulnerable self, which is a topic in and of itself, but we'll do that next time.
Yeah. And I think, even tying this into like the world that we live in right now, right? Loneliness and even, a different stage is like depression, where you fall into this kind of depressed feeling because, you're lonely, and then that leads into other negative thoughts. For me, recently, it became more acceptable to talk about it when I started hearing Andrew Yang on his presidential campaign. And so shout out to the Yang gang. I'm not as influential, but I'm, follower from the early days. But his ability to connect with people, at the same time talking about and bringing up the issue of mental health. The reason we have men that treat women bad is because we're not addressing the mental health issues of boys when they're younger. And we're not addressing the underlying issues. Rather, we're just cutting it off. And it just doesn't make sense of the way that we've approached it so far. We've been so shut off about talking about mental health, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, depression, anxiety, and it's taboo. You can't talk about it, right? Like you have to always keep up this. You can't ever go to work and be like, man, I'm pretty depressed today. Like everyone asks, oh, how are you doing? Is everything fine?
I'm good.
You can tell me if it's not. Yeah, I'm good. Like I love the people that say, you can tell me if it's not. No, I can't. I tell you what, like I'm depressed or I'm mad at, I don't know, my daughter, whatever. Like I'm mad at the person that cut me off on the way to work, driving. The topic of mental health not being discussed perpetuates the cycle of loneliness and depression and anxiety, just all those negative feelings that bring us down. One thing that I would say that Andrew Yang just brought up, when you get into a mindset of scarcity, if your needs are not met or if you're dealing with some other mental health issues of some sort, when you have a mindset of scarcity, your IQ drops by 1 standard deviation. And to me, what that means is you're not being able to access the full capacity of your brain to get yourself out of your situation, which is why it's so important for people to have like a support group. But I was more uplifted by the fact that he was talking about it front and center. And and that's kind of a reason for us to do this particular podcast is we're talking about what we went through, our emotions, our experience front and center, and for the world to see. And there's probably things here that most of our second, third degree friends never even knew about us, right? Like they never even knew that we were dealing with loneliness, that you've dealt with suicide thoughts, like it's just talking about it though, making it going against the grain and removing that we can't talk about that stigma, that taboo, then I think that's in and of itself is pretty powerful. But like, I don't know, for you, when you were going through a lot of different negative aspects of negative mental health, right? Depression, loneliness, anxiety, whatever else you want to call it. What is that mindset like? What were you? Can you frame it for all of us? Like,
yeah. So going back to your Andrew Yang comment for a second, when you're saying when you're in a state of, let's say, this perpetual hopelessness in this case, right? You're saying you're one standard deviation away from your, did you say brain cycle? Or how did you?
No, your mental capacity, your mental ability, right? Like your aptitude to be able to process information. It reduces by one standard deviation, one IQ point, something like that.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. So I remember when I was in like a completely depressive state, this is particularly when me and my ex separated, I didn't know that I was doing this, but normally I walk pretty fast, okay? And my ex walks a lot slower, but when we went on a trip that one time over in Cambodia, I noticed she was walking a lot faster than I was, right? We'll just take this physical trait as an example. I was walking really slow. All of my movements were really just diminished, and I just couldn't think straight. And that's one of the symptoms of depression. Not to say there's obviously a plethora of other ones, but that was one of the main physical traits, is that you just feel sluggish, you feel slow, and everything around you, it just seems like everything's going so fast. Right? So in my situation where, describing what, let's just say depression, you just feel like you can't look forward to anything. Let's put it that way, right? And I almost want to equate depression to a sense of hopelessness. And do you know what it means to be hopeless? Like that, have you ever felt that before?
I felt it a little bit more vicariously through my dad. My dad kind of, I saw elements, if not stages of depression through him when he was with us, because he kept feeling like he wasn't providing enough. He couldn't do everything he was supposed to do, and he couldn't give me blah, 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 blah. When in fact, he taught me a lot of things that set me up for life, but just couldn't see it at that point, right? So he lost hope. He wanted to give up. He just didn't want to continue. So I experienced it more with him at that time when I was younger. But it's interesting in that sense. One quick comment, then I'll let you continue, is that depression, most of the time, I felt like even in different elements when I was depressed, you don't know you're in depression. Like, you've been in depression for a while before you realize it, right? Like, I don't know, would you agree on that? Or
technically, yes, because there's a difference between sadness. Like, we've all experienced sadness, right? But in depression, is usually something that's a little bit more chronic, where something, let's say, it's been lasting for a week to 2 weeks, and it's not quite getting a handle of it, right?
Yeah, I think that's totally right. But that physical trait, you were able to kind of notice it. Like, what did you do after?
It was hard. I mean, it's not something that honestly, it just went away as I continued to process those negative emotions, and as time expanded, meaning, like, we all know that time heals everything. And so after I started getting more away from my ex-girlfriend and trying to start living my own life, it just started getting better and better. And I actually if you don't mind, let me finish my story of hopelessness, actually, because this is something that I actually want to share. And I remember this one story. This was back in October. It was a Friday night, and I remember just coming back from a date. And I was parked at one of my friend's house, and I had called my mom. And so, granted, this was maybe 2 or 3 weeks after my separation with my ex. And I'm sorry, I hate to bring my ex up a lot, but she had a profound meaning in my life. And so because of that, there's a lot of moments in there.
Sure.
I called my mom, just having that hopelessness feeling already, okay? And I told my mom, like, hey, Mom, like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. Like, I just feel really like there's nothing left to live for. And this is something similar to, I guess, what your dad was feeling, where it's like when you have nothing to look forward to anymore, like in life, and I'm talking about completely, like, where you feel like your job's not going anywhere, the relationship's not going to get any better, and you just have that dread of, like, what's the point? It can be really scary.
It's devastating, right? Like the weight of the world is even heavier at that point.
Oh, don't get me started on my midlife crisis, man, or quarter life crisis. That's another story again. So you can tell.
He's full of stories.
I'm an emotional guy. Okay, so, but after that night, I mean, I didn't tell anybody. This is where I went to my roof and almost literally thought about killing myself because I just felt like there was nothing left to look forward to, and it was a really bad feeling. I tell anybody who's ever experiencing the hopelessness feeling is you got to get out of that mindset right away.
Yeah,
because bad things can happen.
Yeah, and it cascades, it snowballs, right? And because you have blinders on at that point, you're not processing everything correctly.
No, you're not.
And if nothing else, you need to find something that'll get into your brain that's different from what you're thinking. And it sounds easier. It sounds easier spoken. Like I think if there's one realization, if anyone is listening to this and you're depressed and you feel hopelessness, like the one thing we can tell you, we won't be able to tell you and diagnose you and get you out of it. But the one thing we can tell you is you need to find something that's going to penetrate your thoughts that's just different from what you're thinking. Everything you're thinking, if you find the what is it called when you just go to the same places to hear the same things, an echo chamber.
Oh,
that's what I was doing.
Yes,
right. And so depression a lot of times will get people into an echo chamber. So if you can just do one thing, is there something in your life, someone in your life that's sounding different than your echo chamber? And latch onto it, hold on to it with dear life, because that's going to pull you out, whatever it is. At least that's how somewhat it was for me. It was something that I saw my dad kind of go through. And for me and my dad, we had to come to a realization that my dad had done everything he could do. And so the rest of his life should be filled with just moments of happiness. He doesn't need to work and provide for her anymore. He just needs to do enough so that my mom has certain things. So there's like this, and there was this realization of him, even to me, telling me he was proud of me, even though he didn't really know what I do, right? And so the story of my life is basically people don't know what I do after I stopped being an engineer, I guess. But his acknowledgement that he was proud of everything I was doing, man, that took close to 30 plus years for me to get. And before then, it just put me into this, am I ever going to be good enough? Right? So the hopelessness could be, is this all there is? The other hopelessness is, am I ever going to be good enough? Right? Like a lot of people just set these expectations, or they think the expectations on the people that matter to them are this and that. It's so construed. It's so like, it's too much, I would say. And for me, I had to hear something different from my echo chamber. And so that's why I kind of say that is, and you reach out to your mom, you reached out to close friends, you reached out to me a couple of times. Hopefully not everything, because let's be honest, this is a side note. Every time Brian calls me with a different situation, sometimes I feel like I give him advice. He does the opposite. So I never get to really see my advice work well for Brian.
What have I listened to you for before? Can you pinpoint anything? I come to you with a lot, so.
And so, but if it's enough to just break the echo chamber, right, and break that mindset of scarcity, that mindset that's just the blinders, and get through to that, regardless of whether or not you listen to my advice, it doesn't matter as long as you break that, right? Like break the glass.
And I actually like that sentiment you're saying, because it gives me perspective, right? I'm telling you my side of the story, you're giving me your side of the story, and all of a sudden I see like, what? There are options. There are options for me to take. It's up to me to choose whether or not I like this option or not. But at least it gets me like you said, it gets me away from my blinders, and all of a sudden I could start choosing, is what he's saying correct, or do I still prefer my option or my thought? So I like that response, actually.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that was very clear, especially as we've seen different kind of people be honest about mental health. Even people like Michelle Obama coming out saying she was depressed, right? Like one thing is not treating it like a sickness, or not treating it too severely from one perspective of I can't seek help or I'm the only one going through this. There's a lot of feelings that we can relate to where you feel like you're the only person going through it. That's not the case. That's something that when Andrew Yang kept over and over to crowd after crowd talking about it, people standing up and saying, thank you so much for talking about this because I felt like I was alone. There were people that got so excited for his campaign, it helped them come out of depression. When they were hopeless, right? They're listening to the news, Trump's doing this, no one's making sense, blah, blah, blah. They're bringing themselves down. They listened to him and that galvanized them to move and to, even help the campaign and do things they never thought they were doing. Phone bank, canvas. The number of people that supported his campaign that flew to Iowa from wherever, dropped everything and flew to Iowa because he had a profound effect just by talking about it. I was blown away. And I think that's why, all the politics aside, he had such a profound effect on 2020. If there was one drumbeat that was going, I feel like he was just a constant message of positivity. But the reality is that the thing that shows is people will respond if you're in that state. If you're in that like depressed state and you're feeling hopeless, you're feeling like the politicians will never go away, they're going to be there till they die, they're just going to focus on the arcane stuff and just go into this cycle, and our political system is running our government is blah 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 blah. You just echo chamber, and what happens? You lose hope. What's the point? The whole system's rigged against me.
So
but
go ahead. I'll talk about that in a second, but go ahead.
Yeah, and he just comes in this completely different message, and that's why to me it's like if someone's saying something that's different, that seems a little positive, no matter how outlandish, hang on to it for dear life. And by and large, like we saw through the Yang Gang just on Twitter, social media, we saw people get saved pretty much. Not like they were, down in the bottom. Not everyone was rock bottom, but people were feeling depressed and, in a state of hopelessness. But yeah, so kind of that's my spiel about like breaking through and hanging on to that. Like, what have you noticed, and what were you going to say?
So going back to your politics at Andrew Yang, for example, that feeling of hopelessness in politics. And when you said all of a sudden people started feeling energized, they felt galvanized because they had something to look forward to. And one of the things that really, really helped me out is going back to the echo chamber example. When you're actually able to self-reflect and all of a sudden say, you know what, I'm going to take responsibility for my actions, for my feeling, and for my emotions, all of a sudden you're giving yourself the power rather than giving the power away to an external object or presence, right? And that's one of the biggest things that allowed me to get a handle of my emotions, actually. So if I'm feeling depressed, for example, one, I break it down. Why am I feeling depressed? Did something happen? Did something trigger it? What can I do to make this depression go away? Right? Same thing with loneliness. Oh God, I'm feeling loneliness. What can I do immediately where I will no longer feel lonely? I could call you, I could call my family, or I could go out and just meet some people, whether through meetup groups. I know, granted, pre-COVID or COVID, we can't, but this is what I was doing before COVID happened, and I was doing a lot better. So I did all of the things that I was able to take control of and basically worked my way around that.
Yeah, and I love just you found your own process, right? So, I mean, we've been talking about this for a little while now on this episode, Brian, but help everyone understand, what have you actually gone through in your life, and what brought you out? What are the actual methods that is not proven for anyone else but Brian, because it was just your experience that worked for you to get you out of those negative states?
I mean, honestly, I'm a bipolar mess right now, actually, right now. Like, before we started this podcast, this whole week has been a real crapshoot, let's just put it that way. I mean, I blame COVID. But again, taking responsibility for my actions was one of the things that really helped me get out of just this emotional funk, right? Being able to actually sit down and just, this is the thing I recommend a lot of people do, because when people get depressed, for example, and I'm going to assume that most people do this when they're in a very depressive or just low state, is they start drinking, right? We go into like alcohol, we go into drugs, we just do everything we can to avoid feeling that negativity, right? We're given antidepressant, we're given anti-anxiety medication. So rather than actually taking substances for masking that emotional pain, the best thing that I did for myself was actually figure out what the hell am I, like, why am I feeling this way? And when you could actually sit down and either actually write it down or whatever it is, you just get it out of your system, even cry, because we all know that crying is actually an emotional release of emotions. And I've done that, many times, right? I'm not gonna lie, I'm a man, whatever, I cry.
Nike.
Yeah, right? And to be able to figure out what it is that's making you feel those specific emotions is a real good way to get a better handle of them. And two is what you said before, just going through your support system, right? Sometimes, we're all social human beings. We're not meant to do things on our own. And so sometimes we do need a picker-upper to help us get out of these emotional states and emotional funks. And so, I mean, these are the two primary things that I have done over the last 2 years that have really gotten me out of this depression and this negativity, and just started looking more for positivity. And actually, the one last thing I do want to bring up is on the concept of being grateful for the things that you already do have, right? Because we did bring this up earlier in this segment today about not having enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not enough. I'm not this. I'm not that. And with all the pressures that we're always succumbing to through just the way we live in, this is, just face it, we're in the 21st century, we have to have so many subscribers, we have to have so many likes, so many friends, that the pressure just builds on to us, and that we forget just the things that we already do have in our lives. So just being grateful for the things that we do have. In my case, I still have a very sustainable job. I have great friends surrounding me like you, even though we're like, miles apart, I can still call you whenever I want. Hopefully I'm not bothering you, but I can reach out to you. And three, just knowing that I still have my health, which is very important for especially what we're going through now. And so, same question for you, man. When you've told me you are depressed, that you're lonely, I'm like, you've never came off as that type of person to me, because you've always, I'll straight up say it, man, you've always been a role model for me to I wish I could be like you in terms of being more stoic and being more emotionally stable. Like how do you do it, dude?
One thing I've had to do in my life by necessity, and it's just been thrust upon me, is actually compartmentalize my life. There were enough things that were going on that one coping mechanism I use is I compartmentalize and then I live in that moment. So if I'm at church, I forget about everything else, I'm at church. If I'm watching TV, I forget about everything else, I'm watching TV. You work and school, whatever it is, you compartmentalize and then you just focus on that moment. What it helps me do is just get through the day and not dwell on things, because when I dwell on things, it becomes worse. It becomes heavier, and that's when negative thoughts creep into my mind. That's when the feeling of I'm not going to do anything right now. I'm too exhausted. You just kind of just give up. The depression kind of hit, when I kept seeing things that I thought I would be good enough to do or get. When I was laid off, I thought I would get a job really quick. Nope. I was laid off and unemployed for a year. And luckily I had my parents and I wasn't on the streets and I wasn't losing money. I had my basic necessities, but that 1 year was like the most unproductive year of my life. And because I watched more Oprah and daytime television than I ever thought I would in my life. Depression for me came from assumption of failures, or even what I perceived of my own failings. So if my engineering exam, so I have my professional engineering license, took me 4 times. After the third one, I was seriously unmotivated. I was like, no, I can't do this. And started creeping up on me. Maybe I'm not good enough and all that. It just starts to bring you down. And luckily, this goes into that practice, just put it into little bits. All I did was take one or two problems and really try to understand it. What am I missing here? Day in and day out. Just don't try to understand everything about this one. We had to learn about seismic design. It kicked my butt. I had to take the darn test, and they don't even give you a discount. There's no repeat discount. You're not a frequent flyer on that one. It's just give me the same amount of money every time. You say, but until I got to the point where I broke it down, I'm like, okay, I want to solve one problem. I don't need to solve all of them. I don't need to learn everything. I just need to solve one problem. And I think that's kind of one thing that I've used all in my life. When you feel like there's too many things going wrong, I like your point about taking control. I refer back to the serenity prayer, and you control what you can control, and you let go of what you can't, and you figure out which ones you can and can't. One thing that has always worked for me is break it down into something that is just small enough for me to figure out or do and accomplish. You've helped me with this, like even push-ups, right? I never thought I'd be able to do 100 push-ups in one day. Start with 10, start with 20, whatever it is, and you just keep working up towards it. I haven't done push-ups in a couple of weeks, but I'll get back onto it. But breaking it down to little bits, look for messages that are outside of the echo chamber, and at some point, disconnect. Just take everything off the table. Whatever is causing you angst and grief and depression, whatever, take it off the table. Take it out of your life for like an hour, a day, a week. Start with an hour, go to a day, and then go to a whole week. Someone's bothering you and they always bother you and they bring you down, avoid them the entire week. Cut them off. Social media, the news, you can't stand it, turn it off. Right? Like a lot of people, I'll bring in engineering again. The guy he was so smart on some things. He actually told all of his followers, if you need to take a break from social media, we're not going to lose momentum because of that. But it's going to be so important that people come back on a positive note. If you feel like, and that's what people realize. When you get thrust into this echo chamber, it wears you down. And so sometimes you just need to cut it off, right? Like, and is it food? You're on a diet and this diet is making you depressed. Dietitians might not agree with this, but cut it off. Your mental health is more important than your physical health, believe it or not. And if you get your mental health back, you'll get your physical health back. So I like to tell people depression and loneliness will come into play. If it's too much, if you feel like the world is just too much, accept what you cannot change and start to change the little bits that you can, every single day, and just hang on to that hope. Hang on to that trusted process. It's a trusted process for athletes to get better, for people to bring themselves out of depression and loneliness or whatever. Anxiety is another one. Get afraid of talking to people in real life or on a stage. What do they tell you to do? Do small ones. Practice, right? And I think that's what anyone listening to this should really take away from both of our messages is it still came back to an internal individual decision. And whatever path you got to find yourself on, that's really what we want you to make sure you do. And don't give up, because you're not alone. You're not the only one going through this. There's plenty of people, and there's, unfortunately, in this COVID pandemic right now, there's more people experiencing it that never experienced it in their lives. And hopefully they don't give up. They don't kind of fall too deep and they get out. And so we just really want to make sure that people take that into account. And if you've listened to this all the way through, we thank you. And we just want you to catch us on our next episode of the Introspection Hour with Brian and Patrick. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.